dangerous point in our history. And if we don't turn things around soon, the recession that we just went through and are kind of slowly creeping out of is just going to be the warm-up act. The main event, the next recession, which will be a public sector debt crisis as opposed to a private sector debt crisis, is going to be a lot worse. Problem is the government's headed in the wrong direction. We're still taking on new debt. You know, they say that when you're in a hole, the first thing you do is you stop digging. The government just keeps digging. You know, so the question now is, okay, we're not in a garden variety recession. We're in a big recession with a capital B. We're in a balance sheet recession. What do? We should declare bankruptcy. That's what we need to do right now. We are bankrupt as a nation. We need to declare, we need to acknowledge that we are bankrupt, and we need to restructure our debts. We need to cut spending. If we're in bankruptcy, we can cut interest costs that we pay, and we just restructure. This is what we need to do. Last year, 1.4 million people in this country filed for personal bankruptcy. Okay, that's the highest it's been since 2005. This year, it's expected to be right around 1.6 million people have filed for bankruptcy. The same is true for business. In 2006, about 20,000 businesses, that's right, 20,000 businesses, 20,000 here, 20,000 there, filed for bankruptcy. Last year, 60,000 businesses filed for bankruptcy. So you have a situation where people are trying to pay their money back. They've been trying to do that for a couple of years. A lot of people are going bankrupt. Most people are trying to pay their money back. A lot of people are going bankrupt. At the federal level, I think we're bankrupt. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind. And it's not just me who says it. There's a professor of economics at Boston University. His name is Lawrence Kotlikoff. And he argued recently in a piece that he posted on Bloomberg that we are bankrupt, and we just don't know it yet. He went through and identified between our funded debt, the unfunded liabilities of Social Security and Medicare, and the guarantees that go to Fannie and Freddie, because now, remember, we have effectively used the US Treasury to completely backstop the housing market. Between all those three categories and all the rest of our obligations, he says that we are $202 trillion in debt. Okay? Our economy right now is a $14 trillion economy. That means, I mean, these numbers are so big they're incomprehensible. But think of it this way. If the government came out and taxed 100% of national income, right? In other words, you graduate college, you go get a job, you work 40 hours a week, you get a paycheck, the paycheck has a zero on it, right? The government could tax 100%, according to Kotlikoff's data, 100% of national income for almost the next 15 years, 14 and a half years. And still, we would still be in debt. It would take almost 15 years for us to get out of debt with 100% taxation of national income. This is why Kotlikoff says we're in bankrupt. I mean, this is not going to happen. The government's never going to, even Krugman wouldn't say you should tax 100% of national income. Nobody says that. 50%, 60%, never 100%. It's not going to happen. It will not happen. So if it's going to take 15 years or thereabouts to pay off our debts at a 100% rate of taxation, how long is it going to take to pay it back at, say, a 30% rate of taxation? And what about all the spending we have to do in the interim? It's not going to happen. We are bankrupt. Formal bankruptcy will be ugly, but it's doable. It is doable. We're not the only country to have faced this kind of issue. One of the things I was going to do, I didn't have time to do, is do some research on the fiscal turnaround that they had in Canada. They did this in the 1990s. Maybe if I come back, we can talk about kind of what happened in Canada. I'm also going to write a piece for our website that talks about what happened in Canada in the 1990s. But, bankruptcy would be ugly, but it's doable. Social Security and Medicare right now, on Social Security and Medicare, we spend $1.4 trillion, just under $1.4 trillion. This is 40% of the federal budget. Okay? This is the biggest government program in the world, literally. When it was originally conceived, Social Security was supposed to just be a small subsistence for the elderly and the infirmed who couldn't work, and they were destitute, right? They were going to be on the street. So people said, okay, we'll have this social insurance program, and will allow people to have a basic subsistence. And you can philosophically agree or disagree whether or not that's reasonable, but as a compromise, maybe you're willing to accept it. The original tax was 1% of your wages up to $3,000 a year. Social Security taxes have been raised 14-fold in the last 75 years, and the program is still unfunded. I mean, it has a huge unfunded liability. 58 million Americans now receive a check from Social Security. That's 1 in 5 Americans, and it is set to go higher because all the baby boomers are retiring. Back in the 30s, when Social Security was first implemented, you had 17 workers that supported each beneficiary. Right now, it's something like 3 to 1, and I think over the next 20 years, it goes down to something like 2 to 1. So the demographics of Social Security just don't work out. We have to cut this program. It can't sustain. One of the things that we haven't done is we have not tied Social Security to increases in life expectancy. Life expectancy has increased dramatically since the 1930s, and yet the retirement age is still the same, 65, that it was back then. So there are a lot of things that can be done, but of course no one wants to do it because there are hard choices that have to be made. So Social Security and Medicare is one place where I think we can make some significant cuts. Another place I think we can make cuts is the military. Right? We spend $680 billion a year on our military. Now, I'm not a military guy, so I can't say how and where we have to cut, but I've got to assume, at $680 billion a year, we spend more money than the next 18 nations combined, okay? The biggest countries in the world, I don't think are going to go to war with each other. China, Japan, South Korea, us, Russia, Brazil, India, South Korea. I don't see us going to war anytime soon. We are inextricably linked by trade. It seems very unlikely that we're going to go to war with any of these nations. And that's a great blessing. I'm glad. It's maybe the first time in history, or at least the first time in a while, when I think we're going to enter, at least among civilized, developed nations, a period of relative peace. That's a great blessing. It means that guys like us can argue about economics instead of having to go shoot people and fight. So with that blessing, though, comes the opportunity, I think, to reduce military spending. In bankruptcy, we might even be able to bring down our interest costs, which are currently running at about $400 billion a year. I don't know, because interest costs are actually pretty low right now. Our stock of outstanding debt is about $14 trillion. $400 billion a year divided by 14 trillion is something under 3%. Maybe it's 3%. That's pretty cheap. I think it's going to be hard to cut interest costs. We might be able to do it. These are the biggest line items in the federal budget: Social Security, Medicare, the military, and interest. But even some of the quote-unquote smaller programs have gotten pretty big, right? The Department of Education this year will spend $64 billion. I don't know what they're spending it on, but they're going to spend it on something. Right? Most education is paid for by state and local governments, not the federal government. So they're spending $64 billion. I don't know what they're spending it on. It's not R&D, it's just the Department of Education. We should probably take a look at that and probably cut it. Food stamps. 40 million Americans receive food stamps right now. The cost of the food stamp program is $73 billion a year. This is a huge expense. It's possible that 40 million people need food stamps. That's 1 out of 8, 1 out of almost 7 Americans, almost 1 out of 8 Americans. Maybe that many people need it. Maybe they do. I don't know. But we got to take a hard look at that. At the very least, we need to means test that program and cut that number down. Farm subsidies. As recently, I looked at some data. As recently as 2005, we were spending $23 billion a year on farm subsidies. Some of the farms price support programs date back to the 1920s. Okay? These are programs that were put in place and have never been removed. And of course now all the constituents in the Midwest who are benefiting from these farm price support programs don't want to give them up. But in reality, the economic conditions that led us to put those farm price supports in place in the first place do not exist anymore. But the programs do. Programs have been around now from the 1920s, almost 100 years, 90 years, whatever it's been, 85, 90 years. We can't afford this stuff anymore. We just can't do it. We have got to make these choices. Government now represents 40% of the economy. It is the highest it's been since World War II.